The savannah trembled as the first light of dawn split the horizon, a silence so sharp it carved fear into the hearts of every creature awake. Richard, the lion, roared with ferocity, his voice a thunderclap tearing through the fragile calm. His rival, Marcus, answered with equal fury, the echo vibrating like a storm's arrival. The air itself recoiled, charged with dread, as the clash of dominance spread across the grasslands. Anna, the lioness, whispered a growl, her eyes darting between her cub and the towering figures of rage. David, the cub, pressed into her side, innocence trembling beneath a world that promised no safety. Nature, indifferent, painted the dawn in blood-red hues, as if warning of what was to unfold. A vulture circled above, its wings stretched wide, sensing death below. The wind dragged dry grass across the earth, hissing like serpents waiting to strike. Marcus stepped forward, mane bristling, the ground quaking under his paws, and said, "This land will not be yours." Richard bared his teeth, every muscle tense, his eyes burning with survival's command, and replied, "I will claim it, or I will die here." The dawn stretched across the savannah, shadows sharp as blades, silence crushing as life held its breath. Richard advanced one step, mane blazing like fire, eyes locked on Marcus. The air trembled, and Anna whispered to herself, "This war will break us." David whimpered, too young to understand but sensing terror rooted in the earth. Marcus growled deep, his voice crawling over the land, every creature listening in dread. Nature's court stood open, its verdict yet unspoken, its weight undeniable. The silence fractured as Marcus lunged forward, claws scraping stone, yet halted inches from collision. Richard roared in defiance, his body trembling but unbroken. Anna held her cub tighter, whispering, "Stay still, David." The cub's small eyes, wide and shimmering, captured the reflection of giants preparing for chaos. The savannah, ancient and merciless, tilted its balance, waiting to choose who would endure. The earth rumbled under the weight of rivals ready to clash, soundless seconds stretching into eternity. Ah! Richard's mane flickered with light, his eyes blazing as he said, "You cannot break me." Marcus's tail lashed, his growl a promise of violence. Anna pressed lower into the grass, covering David, whispering, "The sky itself fears this battle." A hawk cried overhead, piercing the charged silence. The storm of survival had begun, and no creature could escape its verdict. Richard's heart thundered, his body a fortress trembling under destiny's weight. Marcus advanced, his steps slow, deliberate, inevitable. Anna whispered to her cub, "If he falls, we fall." David whimpered again, his innocence a fragile echo in a world deaf to mercy. Above, the vulture dipped lower, shadow stretching like a prelude to death. The savannah softened as the first golden beams stretched across the land, burning away the mist. Richard stood still, chest heaving, his roar fading into silence that carried weight like chains. Anna pressed closer to David, her voice trembling as she said, "You must see what strength costs." The cub looked up at her, wide-eyed innocence, untouched yet already burdened with fear. Marcus stalked the distance, pacing, waiting, his shadow cutting the ground like a blade. The land itself seemed to hold its breath, waiting for a choice that could not be undone. Above, vultures hovered, patient witnesses to nature's relentless trial. Anna's eyes narrowed as her body curved over her cub, her muscles tense yet trembling with quiet resolve. She whispered, "The world is cruel, but still we fight to hold life." David's tiny body pressed against her warmth, heart racing. Richard turned his head, catching her gaze, and in that silent exchange, the weight of family became his shield. Marcus snarled in the distance, his voice clawing the horizon, but it could not reach the bond formed in Anna's embrace. The grass swayed as the wind sang low, carrying with it the taste of fear and devotion. Richard moved closer to his family, his mane brushing against Anna as he lowered his head. He said, "I will not let him take what is ours." His voice carried raw determination, yet behind it trembled doubt. Anna breathed deeply, her breath hot against the cub's fur. David whimpered softly, a sound so small, yet echoing louder than any roar. The savanna framed their fragile union, wild grass curling around them like hands trying to protect something fleeting. The sun crept higher, painting everything with warmth that felt fragile against the cold certainty of violence. The rival roared again, and Marcus's voice struck like thunder, echoing across the plain. Richard's ear twitched, his body rigid, but he did not step back. Anna whispered, "He does not fight for you, he fights for hunger." Her eyes reflected both fear and defiance. David shivered, his tiny claws digging into the earth, trying to anchor himself. The savanna trembled with every sound, but above all, the bond of blood pressed heavier than the threat of death. Shadows stretched long as the rising sun split the land between predator and protector. The moment thickened into silence, heavy as stone, fragile as glass. Richard pressed closer to his family, his mane brushing David's small body as if passing strength through touch. Anna closed her eyes briefly, whispering, "We stand or we vanish." David looked between them, his gaze filled with innocence that did not yet understand the price of survival. The savanna's horizon shimmered, heat and light, bending the world into a dream that felt brittle. But beneath that haze, destiny sharpened its claws, ready to strike. The air thickened with tension as Marcus stalked forward, his paws striking the earth like drums of war. Richard lowered his head, mane flaring in the rising sun, and said, "Every step you take is a wound to my bloodline." Anna pressed tighter against David, whispering, "Fear not, little one, even storms must pass." The cub's eyes darted wildly, reflecting the clash of giants preparing to break the silence. Above, the sky burned brighter, as if the heavens themselves were caught in the storm of survival. Nature sharpened its edge, pressing the moment toward inevitable violence. Richard lunged, claws tearing through dust, his roar thunderous, splitting the air. Marcus countered, his body a wall of muscle crashing forward. Anna hissed low, tail lashing, her body shielding David. The cub whimpered, his small frame trembling, yet his eyes never left his father. The ground cracked under their battle, earth itself protesting the violence unleashed. Every sound carried weight, every strike echoing through the savanna like war drums. The grass bent and broke, crushed under survival's cruel dance. The clash shook the air as Richard and Marcus collided, roars shattering silence, muscles straining, teeth snapping. Anna growled fiercely, warning away the encroaching vultures circling lower. David whimpered again, pawing nervously at the soil as fear gripped his small heart. Richard's mane tore against Marcus's claws, blood streaking the earth, yet his eyes did not falter. Marcus snarled, breath hot, spittle flashing in sunlight, as he pressed forward with crushing weight. The savanna leaned into chaos, its silence fractured by violence that refused to end. Richard stumbled, his legs shaking, his chest heaving, blood dripping into the dust. Marcus pressed harder, his growl low, steady, merciless. Anna's voice cracked as she whispered, "Stand, Richard, the world is watching." David whimpered, his tiny claws digging trenches into the dirt, as if to anchor his fragile body against the storm. Richard's eyes burned, defiance unbroken, as he snarled through blood, "I will not yield." The horizon blurred as heat shimmered, bending light into waves that mirrored the battle's fury. The struggle deepened, each breath heavy, each strike a promise of ruin. Richard's roar tore through the land, desperate yet unbroken. Marcus answered with a growl that felt like finality, crushing, relentless. Anna's heart pounded as she leaned lower, whispering, "Strength is not enough. Only will endures." David's eyes shone, tears glimmering as he buried into her warmth. Above them, the vultures dropped lower still, their shadows crawling across the battlefield, like fate itself. The savanna groaned beneath the weight of destiny, pressing its hand down hard. The battle raged until Richard faltered, his chest rising raggedly, blood darkening his mane. Marcus paused, his eyes narrowing not with cruelty, but with something heavier. He whispered through his growl, "I fight not for hatred, but for my starving kin." Anna's gaze sharpened, realization cutting deeper than claws. David whimpered, sensing the shift though not understanding. The savannah hushed, as if the world itself leaned closer to hear this hidden truth. Richard's eyes burned with fury, but softened as Marcus's words settled in. He said, "You cloak blood with sorrow, but hunger makes no mercy." Marcus's tail lashed as he replied, "Survival spares no heart." Anna pressed closer to her cub, whispering, "Even rivals carry burdens unseen." The land seemed to darken, not from storm clouds, but from the weight of revelation. The savannah no longer felt vast. It felt like a cage. The vultures circled lower, shadows gliding across the battlefield, as if mocking both predator and prey. Richard staggered, his strength fading, yet his spirit unbroken. He roared, "If hunger drives you, then let this fight decide for all." Marcus's reply came cold, "I cannot yield, for my pride starves while yours still feeds." Anna's heart clenched as she whispered, "Truth cuts deeper than claws." David trembled, burying himself in her warmth. The savannah listened, silent witness to a war fed by desperation, not malice. Marcus lunged again, his roar thunderous, but hesitation flickered in his stride. Richard countered with teeth bared, blood flying as claws raked the earth. Anna gasped, whispering, "They fight not for dominance but for survival itself." David's small eyes shimmered with fear, yet he did not look away. The savannah seemed to pulse with their struggle, every gust of wind carrying the scent of despair. Nature revealed itself not as cruel, but absolute, an unyielding judge without pity. The revelation cracked the world open. This was not a war of pride, but of survival against emptiness. Richard's breath shook as he said, "We are bound by the same chains." Marcus growled, "Yet only one pride will eat." Anna whispered, "This is the cruelty of truth, it spares no soul." David whimpered once more, his innocence fragile against the weight of the revelation. Above, the vultures shrieked, a chorus of fate echoing across the horizon. The savannah bore witness, its silence absolute, its judgment final. The savannah exploded as Richard charged, his roar tearing the horizon in two. Marcus met him head-on, their bodies crashing with bone-shaking force. Anna gasped, whispering, "This is the moment that decides everything." David whimpered, burying himself deeper into her warmth. Dust spiraled around them, choking the air as the clash of survival erupted. The sky blazed red, the land itself trembling under the violence of destiny. Claws tore through flesh, manes tangled, and the air screamed with roars that shattered silence. Richard's strength surged, fueled by desperation, his voice breaking as he said, "This land is my blood." Marcus snarled back, "Your blood feeds my pride." Anna's heart raced, eyes darting between them, whispering, "Only one will rise from this storm." David's small body shook violently, innocence suffocated by chaos. Richard fell to his side, blood staining the earth, but his roar rose again, ragged and defiant. Marcus pounced, jaws snapping inches from his throat, the ground splitting beneath their struggle. Anna cried out, "Stand, Richard!" her voice cracking like breaking stone. David whimpered, small eyes shimmering with terror. The vultures shrieked louder, circling low, as if announcing the end. The savannah's silence cracked open, filled with violence and despair. Richard's body trembled, his breath shallow, yet his eyes burned unbroken. He snarled through blood, "I will not die on my knees." Marcus struck again, but Richard surged upward, driving his claws deep into his rival's chest. Anna's breath caught, whispering, "He fights with the weight of us all." David whimpered, his gaze fixed on the storm of violence. The ground shook, the savannah bending beneath the force of their clash. The battle reached its peak, the savannah echoing with roars that tore through earth and sky. Richard drove forward, forcing Marcus back, their strength colliding like thunder. Marcus roared in anguish, his body staggering, but his spirit still burned. Anna whispered, "Survival has no mercy." David pressed against her, trembling, yet his eyes shone with awe. Above, The vultures shrieked, wings slicing the sky, as destiny struck its final chord. The battlefield lay drowned in silence, dust settling over broken earth as if the land itself sought to bury the violence that had scarred its surface. Marcus collapsed heavily, his chest rising with shallow tremors, his mane torn and stained by crimson rivers that seeped into the soil. Richard staggered, his paws unsteady, his mane heavy with blood and sweat, but his body refused to fall. He stood trembling, chest heaving, each breath dragged up from a place beyond flesh, a place born of will alone. Anna pressed herself against David, her eyes wide, shimmering with the reflection of survival's cruel toll. She whispered, "The land has spoken, though its words are carved in blood." David whimpered, his small frame shuddering as he pressed tighter into her warmth, innocence colliding with horror. Above, the vultures circled slower, their wings beating like the hands of time, as if reluctant to descend upon the fallen. The Savannah exhaled, its air thick with dust, its silence echoing not relief but the inevitability of sacrifice. Richard's eyes, dimmed by exhaustion yet fierce with defiance, locked upon Marcus, who lay beaten but alive. Marcus turned his head slowly, his gaze flickering like the dying embers of a fire, and his voice rasped low, "Hunger was my only master." His words carried no malice, only the brittle weight of truth. Richard staggered closer, mane dragging low, his voice heavy. "It rules us all, yet it consumes each of us differently." Anna lowered her head, her whisper cracked by grief. "Even victory tastes of ashes when it is bought with sorrow." David blinked up at her, wide eyes glistening with questions his youth could not yet form. The Savannah stretched endlessly, its horizon gleaming beneath the new light of day, indifferent to the fallen and the standing alike. In that cruel vastness, the line between predator and prey dissolved into one shared burden, survival without mercy. The ground, scarred with claw marks and blood, bore witness in silence, each groove carved into the earth, a story of desperation. Richard dragged himself forward until his shadow fell across Marcus's broken body, yet his claws remained sheathed. He did not strike again. His breath trembled as he whispered, "This ends here not by death, but by survival." Marcus's eyes closed briefly, his body sinking deeper into the dust, but his voice cracked like dry wood. "Mercy cannot fill empty bellies." Anna's eyes filled with unshed tears, her voice hushed. "Mercy does not feed, but it saves what hunger cannot devour. The soul." David shifted nervously, his tiny claws scratching the ground, seeking stability against a world that swayed with cruelty. Above, the vultures drifted further, wings gliding into distance as if fate itself had grown weary of watching. The Savannah, timeless and vast, stood unblinking, its silence absolute, its truth indifferent. Richard turned from Marcus, his steps dragging, his body trembling like a tree swaying under storm winds. He staggered back toward Anna, his mane heavy, each breath rattling but determined. Anna rose to meet him, pressing her head into his chest, her eyes closing as her voice whispered, "You are still here, and that is enough." Richard lowered his head, brushing his mane against hers, his eyes closing briefly as if drawing strength from her breath. David nestled between them, his body trembling, but his small face pressed into the safety of their embrace. The Savannah exhaled softly, the wind stirring grass that had been flattened by the chaos of battle, carrying with it the scent of blood and dust. Above, the sun climbed higher, pouring its light over scars both flesh and earth. The silence that followed was not peace, but the weary pause of a world that demanded its survivors rise again tomorrow. The final breath of dawn spread across the horizon, its light spilling into every shadow left behind by violence. Richard stood beside Anna, their bodies scarred yet upright. David pressed between them like a fragile ember against the wind. Marcus lay still in the distance, his body half swallowed by dust, his hunger never sated, his roar silenced. Anna lifted her gaze to the horizon, her voice a whisper, "Survival spares no soul, but still we endure." Richard raised his head, mane torn but glowing faintly in the morning blaze, his voice steady though broken. "The scars are not curses. they are the proof we remain. David blinked, his tiny cry piercing the silence, fragile yet defiant, carrying the sound of tomorrow. Above them, the vultures drifted farther until they became mere specks swallowed by the sky. The savannah stretched infinite, its silence eternal, its judgment final, its truth absolute. The savannah lay hushed, its silence stretched thin as the sun crawled higher, gold spilling across blood-stained earth. Richard stood still, mane torn and damp, his chest rising with heavy breaths that rattled like wind in hollow bones. Anna pressed close beside him, her flank touching his, warmth fighting against the chill that still lingered in his blood. David nestled at her side, his eyes wide, staring not at his father's battered form, but at the still shadow of Marcus lying broken in the dust. The vultures circled once more, but now hesitated, as if even they respected the gravity of what had been witnessed. Richard lowered his head slowly, his eyes burning not with triumph, but with sorrow, and whispered, "Every victory costs more than flesh." Anna turned her gaze to him, her voice steady, "The scars are not just yours, they belong to us all." The cub whimpered, his small voice breaking the vast silence, an echo of innocence in a world that demanded only endurance. Richard staggered forward, each step dragging weight heavier than his wounded body could bear. His paws left dark streaks on the soil, not just blood but the memory of every strike, every roar, every breath spent in defiance. Anna followed close, her eyes never leaving him, her voice breaking softly as she said, "Do not fall, not when we have endured this storm." David pressed against her leg, stumbling to keep pace, his small claws digging furrows in the soft earth. The savannah stretched endless and indifferent, yet for this fragile family, it had become both cradle and grave. Marcus's body behind them seemed to fade, swallowed into dust, a reminder that hunger was as merciless as any claw. Richard lifted his gaze to the horizon, where the golden shimmer of the rising day promised both hope and despair. His voice rumbled low, weary yet unyielding, "This land remembers blood, but it will also remember us." The vultures cried out above, their harsh voices carrying across the land like echoes of judgment. David startled, his head jerking upward, ears pressed back, but Anna lowered hers to his, whispering, "Do not fear, little one, their voices cannot touch us." Richard stopped, his chest heaving, his gaze fixed on the birds as if weighing the truth of her words. He spoke slowly, "They wait for all of us in time, but today we are still standing." His body sagged as he lowered himself onto the earth, muscles trembling, yet his eyes never closed. Anna moved beside him, resting against his flank, her breath steadying as if her presence alone could keep him upright. David pressed between them, tiny body quivering, but his eyes wide and unblinking, watching the horizon where the sun climbed higher into the sky. The savannah glowed, both cruel and magnificent, a reminder that life was neither gift nor curse, it was simply endured. The world held its breath as silence fell heavy again, broken only by the rustle of grass stirred by a gentle wind. Richard's gaze softened as he looked to his cub, his voice low and rough, "You are the echo of everything we have endured." David blinked slowly, his innocence reflecting back a future unshaped by scars, yet already marked by them. Anna's eyes glistened as she whispered, "He will carry us forward, whether the land accepts or denies him." The vultures drifted higher, vanishing one by one into the distance, as though even fate had turned its gaze elsewhere. Richard's chest rose once more, deep and deliberate, his breath carrying not triumph but survival's quiet truth. The savannah's horizon shimmered under the blaze of morning, eternal, indifferent, yet a witness to lives fought and lost within its endless reach. The final cry rose, not from predator, not from prey, but from the land itself, carrying the weight of silence louder than any roar. Richard stood once more, battered yet unbroken, his eyes fixed on the horizon. Anna pressed close, her voice a whisper, "We walk forward, though the scars follow." David stumbled but lifted his head, his small cry breaking the air, fragile yet defiant, an echo that pierced the dawn. The sun blazed high, swallowing the blood, the dust and the shadows, but leaving the bond of survival etched into eternity. The Savannah's silence stretched eternal, holding their story not in mercy or cruelty, but in absolute truth.